Hello there. We are going to discuss today here Bogo Indian defense. So you want to play after d4, knight f6, c4, e6. You are ready for Nimzo Indian after knight c3, bishop b4, which we discussed in two of Nimzo Indian tape. But as we said there, that knight c3 is not mandatory for white. So white can try to avoid Nimzo by playing knight f3 or by playing g3. And let's discuss what we can do then. Let's start with knight f3 move. The options we have here are b6, transposing to getting to different opening than Bogo Indian, but very close, which called Queen's Indian, and also d5, transposing to Queen's Gambit. But for players who like to play bishop b4 on a third move in Nimzo Indian, much more suitable will be bishop b4 check, and that's what we want to discuss today. After bishop b4 check, we get positions that are very close and similar to the ones in Nimzo Indian defense. After bishop b4 check, there are practically two moves for white that should be considered. There are bishop d2 or knight b1 to d2. A knight c3 move should not be seriously considered, since after we play c5, we can easily transpose to Nimzo Indian defense, or even if we play b6. So this is going to be kind of transposition. For those who likes my suggestion in Nimzo Indian, I would recommend to play c5. Then you're going to have the transposition. Okay, bishop d2 and knight b1 to d2. And we start with bishop d2. And the move I recommend is queen e7. And this move is not necessarily better than c5 or a5 or bishop takes to d2. But this is the move we want to discuss today. This is my recommendation. So what I'm trying to do here is to show you the easy way to play opening. And again, I said it on the other tapes we produced, that we are not necessarily giving you better position or easy equality or advantage. We are giving you positions that are easy to play. And you know what your plan is going to be in the middle game, and it's a good window for your middle game. And you're going to be you will pass the opening without problems. So you play queen to e7, and what you want to do, eventually these bishops will be exchanged. And later on, our plan will be d6 and e5. We trying to put here dark square pawn structure in the center and open the light square bishop. Now let's go move by move. The main move in this position, g3. If you know what your plan is, you should not be concerned with moves like a3 or knight to c3. Move like a3, you know the pawn structure you need, and you see your bishop is hanging. This makes your decision very easy and simple. You just play bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, or knight takes d2. You will go d6, followed by e5, you have an easy plan here. The move that promises some kind of advantage for white, if there is any, is g3. And let's go with this move first, g3, and then we may discuss some side variations. After g3, the move is recommended knight to c6. Why knight to c6 in such an early stage of the game, before even we castle? Well, there is an idea behind this move. What white wants to do, for instance, if we took here on d2 now, white will retake with a queen, and knight will go to c3, almost the next move, unless black plays knight e4 and then queen c2. And knight on c3 placed very well, followed by e4. But what we're playing here, we go knight to c6, and if white plays normal move, bishop takes g2, now we play bishop takes to d2. And interestingly enough, we're almost forcing here white to retake this bishop with b knight. b1 takes d2. Queen takes d2. We make a short stop here. Simply not a good move, because after knight e4, attacking the queen, and after white plays queen c2, and we give queen b4 check, we can tell that white has some problems here. And probably the only move is to move king, and this cannot be very good. What happens after knight d2? If white interposes knight c3 or knight d2, they lose some material. And let's see how. After knight c3, we can simply play knight takes c3. And if queen takes c3, here we don't win material, but we have very good endgame because of the weaknesses. And in any other case, we do win material. Let's see what we mean. If not knight c3 but knight d2, then knight takes d2. And when white retakes on d2, they're going to lose either c4 or d4 pawn. Knight takes d2, knight takes d4, and queen takes d2, queen takes c4. White loses a pawn. So the correct way to play for white after bishop takes d2, the correct way to retake is knight b2 takes to d2. That's why we played knight c6. Now we go d6. If white castles, black castles, we want to play e5 next move. We want to and we will. And you can tell that knight on d2 is not nearly as well placed as on c3. Knight on c3 is much better placed, because now we're going to go e2. We don't have to worry about knight coming to d5, and knight on d2 is not good also, because normally when white plays like this, knight d2, e4 and d5, knight should go on d2 from f3. So what we do here, we castle and we want to play e5 next move. White has a couple of different ways to play there. White can go e4, and then we of course play e5. That's what we wanted to do. And after d5, we play knight back to b8. Why are we going on b8, and how good is it? Is this really a problem? No, it's not. we did waste time on going knight c6 and knight b8, that's true. But remember, position is closed. So tempo is not as valuable as it possibly can be in open position. However, we sacrifice this tempo for some particular reason. The reason is this. We put our pawns on dark, and we have a better bishop than white has. Our bishop is better since white's pawn are on white squares and black's pawn are on dark, and that makes our light square bishop is better piece. Also, we have potential outpost on the c5, so which gives, I would say, in this position, white simply has no advantage. And I am willing to back up my words with some analysis. Okay, after knight b8, again, black has several ways to play this position. White has several ways, sorry. So knight to e1, knight to d3 to put, and then try to play b4, c5, or even f4. Looks very active and promising. But let's see what can black do on that. Okay, let's try knight e1. And now I would like to play a5. What we're trying to do to put knight on a6 and knight on c5. White plays knight d3, and now we go knight a6. What are we trying to do? We stopped c5. Now white can go with f4 and try to get an attack on king's side, or white can try to play on a queen's side by playing a3, b4, and advancing on queen's side, like it's typical for king's Indian defense. But you know, the difference between this position and king's Indian position is that we don't have dark squared bishop. This is one good difference for black. And the other difference is that fianchettoed bishop is not very active. Okay, the way we play against it is like this. After knight e1, a5, knight d3, knight a6, suppose white goes simply a3. Now they want to play b4 on the very next move. And we can't stop it. So we go bishop to d7. White plays b4. What can black do now? We have a good way to play here, c6. What is the idea of this c6 move? The idea of this move is to play c takes d. And after white retakes c takes d, to play bishop b5 and get rid of this knight, which a lot of times is going to be a very good piece. And a question here, after c6, maybe white can recapture on a5. Well, then we take c takes d, and bishop b5. This gives black very good position, because what we're going to do, we will take eventually this knight, and we will have permanent outpost for our knight on c5, and we can support it with the other knight. Maybe even this knight from f6 will go to c5. So this position I would consider as very comfortable position for black. Now if we go back for a few moves in this position, This is the start position. When white plays d5, we go knight b8. Now, what if white tries to play b4 and c5 on queen side without playing knight e1, knight d3? This is a very good question. Let's try b4. After b4, I would recommend a5, a3, and now knight a6. What we want to do, we still want to go bishop d7 and c6. We have the same plan. We are not attacking on b4 because after pawn takes and pawn takes, knight cannot take on b4 since rook is hanging. But we're playing knight a6 because knight simply belongs here, not to attack this pawn right away. Suppose white plays queen b3. We play bishop d7 as a programmed move. And suppose white tries to prepare c5, somehow to play rook fc1. Then we go c6 again. And I have to point here that if white tries to get past pawn by playing d takes c, b takes c, and play b5, we will always get very nice outpost on c5. So this will be a good position for white, for black. So what we do, we play c6, and if white plays in this position, for example, rook b1, or some neutral move like bishop f1, I will show you here very interesting positional pattern. This was played, this kind of pattern was used even by Kasparov in a match against Karpov in the different opening. It was King's Indian opening, but it was used on the queen side, same kind of idea. But the same idea is much better looks in this opening because Kasparov had and Karpov, they had dark square bishops. Here is no dark square bishop. After bishop f1 or rook a to b1, what we do is we play a takes b, and now c5. This is very, very strong. This guarantees black at least an equality. Now we are attacking b4 pawn twice, and as you can easily see, there is no way for white to defend this pawn. So what they have to do, they have to take on c5, b takes c, or simply push b5. Now, if white plays b takes c, after knight takes c5, black simply has sizable advantage, because if white goes queen c2, now black can play rook f to b8, transfer their pieces to queen side, and white has very bad pieces here, passive. And what black can do, black can play bishop g4, play knight d7 to support their c5 knight in case it will be exchanged in the future. Black is better here. Or the other way to react for white would be playing b5 instead of b takes c. Then we go knight b4, and we have a permanent knight on b4. It's true, this knight does not really have too much of a future, but you have to see that it controls a lot of squares in white's camp. Position is, I would say, approximately equal, even though I do prefer black, to play with black. It's easier to play for black, but it's I cannot tell that black has really advantage here, but black is very comfortable here. Okay, so what we say here, this position after white played e4 and we went knight b8, and this is the position we have. We castled, white plays e4, e5, d5, knight b8. Now let's try to see what happens if white tries to play on a king side. Knight a1, a5, knight d3, knight a6, and f4. Now what white is trying to do here is just to get standard attack on the king side by playing f5, g4, g5, and mating black on king side. Well, what should we do here? Of course, we have to try to get our counterplay on the queen side. After f4, move we make is c6, and we give white an option. If white can take on e5, then we simply retake, and then white does not have an attack. Later we can take on d5, go knight c5, and we are not experiencing any problems. So the logical continuation after f4 would be f5. Okay, now just to see the big difference in positions where dark squares on the board, this position, for example, if we put dark squares on the board, I would consider very difficult for black. The difficult because one, dark square, black's dark square bishop is very bad. Two, when white starts attack, white's dark square bishop will play maybe very important role in this attack. And three, and very important, that black's dark square bishop clogging black's pieces from coming to protect the king. So we have position where dark squares are off the board. And let's see how we can assess it. White plays f5, and we have to play here bishop d7 or cd, one followed by the other. If we take cd, and I would prefer bishop d7 first. Okay, after g4, we can go h6. Suppose white goes h4, and then insist on playing g5 next move. Well, g5 may not be so good. It may be premature here, because remember, after we take and we go knight h7, g-pawn will be attacked twice. Also, what else we can do, the patterns of fighting against this attack. What else we can do? We may play knight h7 and attack h4 pawn. This stops g5. Now, if white plays knight f3, then we can take cd, and you will see how quickly we can get counterplay. Bishop b5, and black can very soon regain the initiative. They can gain an initiative by playing knight b4 or knight c5 next. So this position, I don't think is very good for white. For instance, if white plays queen d2, you can tell here. First, we can play knight c5 or knight b4. If you see at some point that g5 is a threat, you can always go f6. That's true. Our knight is bad on h7. I agree with that. But what about this bishop? What about this knight? We stop g5, and we have play on queen side. I love black's position here, and I think you should too. So that's approximately what can happen if white plays for f4 and f5. Those are the ideas we can adapt. So in this position, when white goes knight e1, we can play a5 again, and after knight d3, knight a6, then f4, c6. See, no matter what white does here, we have the same plan. c6, then bishop d7, try to take cd and bishop b5, or in case white goes a4, we try to take cd and go b5. You know, we cannot cover now move by move this position, because this is strategy, chess strategy, and you have to know what your plans are, what your ideas are, and you should be able to get reasonably good position if you use those ideas properly. Now let's look at another possibility for white. After d4, c6, c4, knight f6, knight f3, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, queen e7, g3, knight c6. Now, instead of playing bishop g2 here, white may play knight c3. This became popular lately for white. After bishop g2, bishop takes d2, white did not really like the type of position and the outcomes of this variation. So white tried knight c3, and this becomes very popular. Now, let's try what we should do. Bishop takes c3. We have to play this to make sure that after bishop recaptures and we play knight e4, we make sure that we do get this dark square bishop sooner or later. And here, the best move for white is rook c1, after which we castle. White plays bishop g2, and we go d6. And here is our plan. For now, we're keeping an eye on dark square bishop, which white cannot save. For instance, if white castles here, we can simply play knight takes to c3, rook takes to c3, and then e5, with all the same ideas we had before. We keep pawns on dark squares. After d5, we go knight b8, and then we play knight d7, and all the same ideas. I saw one game when white played knight d2, and after knight d7, white played f4. Here, white wants to go f5 and place knight on e4. But then, after simple e takes f, g takes f, and f5, black has very good position. Next move is knight f6, and black is in good shape. Now, let's see what happens if white plays sharper. In this position, the sharper continuation, instead of castling, is d5. This is much more ambitious. White plays d5, attacking knight. The most common move in this position is knight to d8, which gives black very playable position. What I would recommend here also for black is to play knight takes c3, rook takes c3, and knight to d8. Now, why knight d8 and not knight b8 the way we played before? The problem with knight b8 move in this position is that white may take d takes e, and after we take it with a bishop, then knight d4, this is kind of unpleasant position for black. And if we take fe, maybe also knight d4. And black is experiencing some problems. We're going to have to go c6, and then it's difficult to develop these pieces. And d pawn may be weak after e4 and rook d3. And here is the idea behind the move knight d8. What is the idea? After knight d8, we want to play e5, f5, and try to get the same pawn structure we discussed before. So only way for white to play for initiative is d takes e. Now we play f takes e, and we see now how different it is between this position, big difference between this position and position with a knight on b8. Here is the difference. If white castles, we go c6, and you see the d pawn for black is no longer weakness, because we're going to go knight to f7, and pawn on d6 is protected forever. Even if white goes e4, we can go knight to f7, comfortably protecting d pawn, and later we're going to go e5 and develop our bishop. Black's position is very comfortable. I personally like it. And if you don't agree with me, then you are invited to discuss this position with me. I'll be more than happy to discuss it with you. So now, after d5, when we went knight takes c3, we took the bishop, rook takes c3, and knight d8. White did not castle yet. If white castles, we said we are okay after e5, and if white captures on e6, we are still okay after f takes e. So we are okay both ways. So the whole position is very flexible and very good for black. Now let's deviate for white in earlier stage of the game. So what can happen here? Of course, all this is not forced. This is just most popular continuation, but not all forced. d4, knight f6, c4, e6. Knight f3, bishop b4, check. Now, if white plays bishop d2 and we go queen e7, we already are in this position more or less. Whether white plays g3 and bishop g2 and we get to the position we just discussed, or white plays e3 and bishop e2 or bishop d3, it does not really matter. We have the same plan. We're eventually going to exchange those bishops, play d6 and e5, and have a healthy pawn structure and a clear plan. But what happens if white in this position plays knight to d2? The idea of this move is to play a3 and later on have two bishops advantage after black takes, because black really does not want to go back with the bishop. Here are ways to play this position. There is d5 move and there is c5 move. There is b6 move and there is a castle. We are not going to cover all these continuations because we are not analyzing from white's point of view. We want it for black. If we want it for black, we just follow my recommendation. And if you have different opinion about it, of course, other moves are very much playable too. My recommendation is castling in this position. D5 and C5 may be just as good, but we have to stop on one of them, and the easiest to learn the position is after castling. We castled, and believe me, if white knows what they are doing in 90% of the games, you're going to have A3 move. This is the main move here. After this, we take on D2. White takes on D2. And this position is very similar to the Queen C2 variation in Ninzo-Indian. After bishop takes to D2, what white wants is to play bishop G5 and E3. But here, since we want to play D6 on E5, and we want to get this pawn structure, it's very important to waste one tempo and one tempo only on move H6. I recommend this move. It's a good investment of one tempo in this position. Let's see what can happen in this position. White may continue with G3 or with bishop F4. Now, bishop on F4 does not stand nearly as well as on G5. On G5, bishop pins the knight. Bishop on F4 is not nearly as well, since we're going to go D6, and we're going to go Queen E7, and sooner or later, we will play E5. And when we play E5, it's going to be with the tempo. So let's say white plays G3. Then we go D6, bishop G2, Queen E7, castle. White can stop black from playing E5 only for one move. After bishop C3, we have the same knight E4 move. But if white castles, now there is no point for black to play knight E4, since white can move the bishop back, and this knight is going to be unattended in the center, or bishop E1 even. So we do play E5, and we have fine position here. If white tries something like d takes E, and d takes E, bishop B4 is not dangerous, since we have C5. On bishop C3, we can always support this pawn, or even push it. Black is okay here. This is good position for black. Good not from the point of view of getting advantage, but black is comfortable here. So what we learned here, that black has almost one strategical plan, is to play bishop B4, put queen on E7, and play D6 on E5, in different varieties of it, but basically the same plan. Now, after bishop B4 check, white goes knight D2, then we castle. And suppose white plays now queen to C2. Now, this is a little bit tricky move. Why white would play queen C2? Maybe they want to play E4 right away and try to get big space advantage like this. Now, if they do play queen C2, we have several comfortable ways to play. One is C5, simple C5, and after D takes C, we can recapture back and play later D5. Queen on C2 and knight on D2, they are very awkward placed pieces. So queen C2 should not be considered as dangerous continuation. So white has many different ways to play here, but we cannot get confused if white makes some new move that we never discussed or you have never seen, because we have our plan, our guide to the game d6, e5, and exchange this bishop, and you should just stick with it, and you will always get reasonably good position. Now let's try for white slightly different way to play. For example, d4, knight f6, c4, e6. And now white does not play knight f3, and white does not play knight c3. We covered knight f3 as Bogo Indian with bishop b4 check, and we covered Nimzo Indian on the other tapes. So, but what if white wants to play g3? Now, what's the idea of g3 move? Idea behind move g3 that normally they play this against Queen's Indian. Now b6 is not as good after bishop g2. And on d5, white wants to play Catalan. But we are not going to play d5. We are not going to play b6. We go on with our own move, bishop b4. Now white plays bishop d2, and let's see if this is any different. Castle, bishop g2, I'm sorry, of course, queen e7, bishop g2, and we castle. Now, is this position any different from the one we discussed? Of course not. Example, knight c3. Now we cannot retake and play knight e4, since bishop is out and knight is on g1. So we just go d6. And if white plays knight f3, then we go bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, and knight e4. And now you can tell that this position even better than one we had in Bogo Indian. Why is this position better? This is better because black did not waste time on playing knight to c6. If black did not play knight to c6, then they saved tempo. Later, when they play e5 and white goes d5, knight is already on b8, so can go to d7. And after you played knight to e4, you know that you're going to recapture this bishop unless white plays bishop b4. And if white wants to take, after c5, d takes c, d takes c. If white wants to waste all this time for putting bishop on a3, then obviously they cannot count on any advantage in the opening. So we can say that by playing Bogo Indian, we have one safe way of crossing the opening and have good understanding of the middle game that we will get after this. And we have clear plan on what we want to do in the opening and middle game right after. Okay, suppose after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, white wants to stop black from playing bishop b4 once and forever, for all. a3. Now, can we get confused because we cannot play any of the Bogo Indian or the Nimzo Indian ideas? So now we can't go with bishop b4, so what should we play? Obviously, what we should do, we should hit and attack the center, confront white in the center. But why should we do that? Because we cannot play bishop b4? No, because By playing a3, white is completely wasting time. This move a3 cannot be helpful if we play in the center. So we go d5, and if white continues normally, like knight f3, now we can go c5, or even simply bishop b7. We play queen's gambit opening, queen's gambit with extra tempo for black. So a3 are chances for you of getting a3 are approximately the same as the chances of becoming world champion. So I don't think a3 is going to happen. So, well, I would say that after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, the most popular moves are knight f3 and knight c3. And one more interesting point I want to make. After knight f3, if we play bishop b4 check, white goes bishop d2, and we play queen e7, as we said. And what if now white plays knight c3 before they play g3? So we castle, and what if now they go a3, we take, they retake, and we play knight e4. As we said before, we go knight e4 when we can get this bishop. And what if now white never fianchettos this bishop? Let's see, move queen c2. Again, we take on c3, queen takes c3, d6, and white goes e4. This is maybe one of the rare cases when we cannot play e5. We should not play e5 here because we don't have enough pieces on e5 square. But then, again, we can go knight to d7 or knight to c6 to prepare e5. And after knight d7, white can play e5. Now, this is different position. Is this position good for black? Yes, of course it's good. It's very good. It looks like our bishop is bad, knight is immobile, and white has advantage in the center. But why this position is good? This position is good because we're going to see completely different picture in two moves. What we have here, there are two different ways to play for black, and I think both of them are good. One way I like the most is d takes e, and now we play b6. Now what happens, next move, black is going to play bishop b7, and this bishop is going to be the best minor piece on the board. Best minor piece for black and for white together. So after b6, bishop e2, bishop b7, and white castles. Does white have any advantage? No, not even close. Black can play a5 and try to play a4 later and prepare the outpost for black knight on c5. The question here is, what is white's plan? White does not have an attack on king side or the queen side. Maybe white has d-file. No, white's d-file has as much of a d-file as black does. After rook d1, rook d8, we can see that black is comfortably equalized position, equalized the game. So, summarizing everything, we can say that you have yourself one good way to play against d4 openings. So it's going to be either Nimzo Indian or Bogo Indian. There's your good pass to the middle game.